Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Priscilla Rader. I'm the Education Coordinator for the Animal Legal Defense Fund. And thanks for joining us for another Animal Law Academy webinar. This time it's on using local legislation to protect animals. And we'll be looking into the recent retail sale bans of pet stores and puppy mills. So we do have a few handouts in the sidebar. Those can also be found online. So I'll put the links in the chat just in case there's any issue downloading those handouts. And as always, please do take the survey after the webinar. This helps us tremendously in planning for future events. And we have so many fun things planned for 2020 that I'm really excited to share with you. So please do take that survey. It helps a lot. And with all of that out of the way, we will just get right to it. Today joining me is Liz Holtz, Animal Legal Defense Fund Campaign Manager, and she'll be walking us through using local legislation to protect animals and how you, whether you're an attorney, law student, or an advocate, you can help animals at your local level. So please join me in welcoming Liz. We will have a Q&A shortly after her presentation. Thanks.
Hi guys, thank you Priscilla for the introduction. As Priscilla said, my name is Liz Holtz and I'm the campaigns manager at the Animal Legal Defense Fund as well as an attorney. And for the next 45 minutes, I'm going to discuss how you can help fight back against puppy mills by using retail pet sale bans, what they are and why they're important. And then we're also going to discuss how you can actually pass one in your own community. So even if you aren't interested in retail pet sale bans specifically, or perhaps you live in a state that has a statewide retail pet sale ban, and those two states right now are California and Maryland, this webinar is still applicable to you because the tools you're going to learn and what we're going to talk about can be applied to any local legislative campaign pertaining to animal protection. So let's get started. There we go. Just a quick roadmap of what we're going to talk about today. First, why local legislation? Why am I giving this webinar? Then we're going to talk about puppy mills and retail pet sale bans. That'll be really quick because I imagine many of you are already familiar with these concepts. Third, we're going to talk about the legislative process. Just a quick run through of how laws are passed at the local level. And finally, the most important part of the webinar, how to actually pass laws at the local level. And I've broken that down into 2 steps. First, how to sell your idea to legislators. And second, grassroots advocacy, how you can rally your community to amplify your campaign and pass your law. So why local legislation? I think local legislation is one of the best kept secrets in animal protection. First and most obviously, it protects the animals living in your community. For example, if you pass a law banning tethering, and for those of you who don't know, tethering refers to chaining or keeping a dog tied up outdoors, you're protecting not just a few dogs, you're protecting hundreds, thousands, I don't know, tens of thousands of dogs, depending on how big your community is, for a long time. And you're protecting all the dogs that live in that community going forward who will be born in the future, because laws have a tendency to stick around. It's harder to repeal a law once it's on the books. So once you have a good law on the books, it's probably going to stick around for a while. Second, and what might be of interest, especially to animal protection advocates, is that it primes the pump for future legislation at the state and federal level. State and federal laws don't appear out of thin air, usually. For example, if you tried to pass a retail pet sale ban in 1999, you might have been laughed out of the State House because there weren't any retail pet sale bans on the book at that time. California passed the first statewide ban in 2017, and that was a full decade after Albuquerque, New Mexico passed either the first or one of the earliest retail pet sale bans in 2007. It took years of community support at the local level until we saw that transfer to the state level. Of course, I don't want to give anyone the wrong idea. Not all laws originate at the local level and kind of move upwards. For example, cities and counties generally don't regulate aviation because you can imagine if you had a bunch of different laws pertaining to airplanes in a bunch of different cities, it would be chaos. And airlines and airplane manufacturers would be very confused. But in terms of animal protection, which is what we're interested in, a lot of laws can be passed at the local level. And I imagine if any of you have been paying attention to recent animal protection news that you've already been seeing this trend. There are big changes happening right now. So much so that National Geographic recently ran a really nice story about what's going on locally and statewide. And this is the title if you want to check it out. And our very own Kim Kelly, Animal Legal Defense Fund Legislative Affairs Director, was actually interviewed for this story. So from fur bans to decline, changes starting in cities and moving to states. In July, New York became the first state to pass a cat decline ban, and this only happened after multiple cities in California and one city in Colorado, Denver, passed their own cat decline bans. Interestingly, there weren't any bans in New York at the time of the law's passage, but definitely these city bans contributed to the ability of New York legislators to pass a statewide ban. We're also seeing this with fur. I imagine a lot of you have heard that California is poised to become the first state to ban the sale of fur. It's passed the California legislature and awaiting signature by the governor. But that only happened after several major California cities, San Francisco, Los Angeles, passed their own fur bans. And I know personally, I did not think this kind of ban was possible maybe 10 years ago, but it's just a testament to the dedication of animal advocates in California that things we didn't used to think were possible are now coming true. So change at the local level matters. I imagine for some of you it might feel impossible to pass a local law, and I want to assure you that it is possible. You don't need to be a lawyer or an expert or work at an animal protection organization to take on a campaign like this. You just need a little bit of grit and a lot of determination. In my previous job at another animal protection organization, 90% of my job was helping people pass laws at the local level. So I know that the traits that matter the most are passion and compassion more than any kind of expertise. I know a woman in Ohio who passed a tethering ban simply because she saw a dog in need. She saw this dog in her neighborhood who was being left chained outside 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, no matter the weather. And all he had was this flimsy, I don't know, some sort of plastic dog house. She did what most of us would do. She called animal control over and over again, and finally they came out and they said, look, this dog has food, water, and shelter. I mean, we'd say shelter, but that's all the letter of the law required. So they said there's nothing. So she went to her city council member. She said, look, can you please help this dog? And he said, well, I'll look into it, but it looks like, what animal control said is right. They're following the letter of the law. There's nothing to be done. So she said, well, then we need to change the law. And she worked with the council member. She worked to network with local, state, and national animal protection organizations who focus on tethering. And she actually passed the law. And she truly had no experience in politics or lobbying or anything. She was just very determined. So you can be that person too. With that pep talk over, let's start talking about retail pet sale bans and puppy mills. Okay, so what are puppy mills? I'm not going to spend very long on this topic because I imagine, again, most of you on this webinar are familiar with the term, but very quickly, just so that we're all working from the same definition, puppy mills are inhumane commercial dog breeding operations. Dogs in puppy mills are kept in crowded, filthy conditions, usually without exercise or socialization, without veterinary care, or perhaps inadequate veterinary care. Barren wire cages, dirty water, dirty food, these are hallmarks of puppy mills. Puppy mill operators make their money by producing as many puppies as possible, without any regard for the well-being of the animals being used. As a result, neglect and disease are common. Dogs in puppy mills frequently suffer from conditions like mange, respiratory infections, parasites, basically what you can imagine. I'm sure you've seen on social media photos of like puppy mill busts and have an idea of some of these conditions. It's important to note that when I say puppy mill, that's not defined by statute. It's not a legal term. This is just the term, this is the definition that we use at the Animal Legal Defense Fund and is generally used by other organizations as well. The bottom line is that dogs in puppy mills suffer tremendously, both physically and psychologically. You can imagine spending 24 hours a day in a cage, stacked atop a bunch of other dogs with no access to sunlight, with no companionship. It's a miserable existence. So what can we do to help? We can stop the puppy mill pipeline. The bottom line is that most people are operating puppy mills to make money. So a powerful way to stop the puppy mill pipeline is through a retail pet sale ban. And retail pet sale bans are laws prohibiting pet stores from selling puppies and kittens, sometimes other animals like rabbits who are commercially bred. And a retail pet sale ban does three things. One, it limits the supply and demand for dogs produced in puppy mills. It reduces financial incentives for mill operators, and it encourages adoption. Nearly 300 cities and counties across the country right now have retail pet sale bans. Some notable places include Cook County, which is Chicago, Philadelphia, Boston, El Paso, and new bans are being considered every single day. It's rare that a week goes by that I don't see a news story about a retail pet sale ban being considered, or a group at least lobbying for such a ban, or someone introducing me. I just did this very quickly. These are all the articles I found when I went on Google and went to Google News and searched, I think, something like puppy mill ban. So there's a lot of action in this area right now. Before we get any further, I do have to mention that there are state laws that may impact your ability to pass a local ban. As I mentioned, California and Maryland are the two states that have statewide retail pet sale bans, and I predict there are going to be more states in the near future. Some state legislatures that are either, if they're still in session, are still considering bills, or at least considered a bill in their most recent legislative session include, I believe, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Rhode Island. Don't quote me on that, but there are multiple states who are seriously considering their own statewide ban. Now for some less good news is that there are also something called preemption laws. Puppy mill operators and the people who profit off of breeding dogs don't like these retail pet sale bans. So lobbyists for the pet store industry have been pressuring state legislatures to pass laws that actually block cities and counties' ability to adopt retail pet sale bans. Currently, the two states that have those laws are Arizona and Ohio. But on the good news side is that the Animal Legal Defense Fund and many other local and state and national groups have successfully fended off a lot of these attempts. So for example, if you live in Florida, you probably received alerts from us about an attempt in the Florida legislature to pass a preemption law. And hundreds of you, I think more than 600 Animal Legal Defense Fund supporters in Florida contacted their legislator and told them not to pass the ban, and or not to pass this law. And if you take into account all the other groups that were working on this issue, I imagine perhaps thousands of people, thousands of Floridians contacted their legislators. We were successful. As you see, Florida is not on that list. I also need to note that the way local and state law interacts, you could also live in a state where, excuse me, where it's not possible as well to pass a ban, and that doesn't mean that a pet store lobbyist went and passed a preemption law. It just means that some states don't delegate as much power to their cities and counties. That issue is way beyond the scope of this webinar, but an easy way to quickly check if that might apply to you is by Googling like something like list of puppy mill bans. And there are groups, I think Best Friends Animal Society is one. They've listed all the current jurisdictions of retail pet sale bans by state. So if you see that another city in your state has already passed a ban, that's a pretty good indication that you'll be able to pass a ban. But don't worry if your state is not listed, or you don't see your state on the list, because it doesn't mean necessarily that you're preempted from passing the law. It just means it hasn't been done yet. But if you do live in California, Maryland, Arizona, or Ohio, don't turn off this webinar, because as I said, we're actually going to switch gears soon and talk about how to pass local legislation generally. So what we're going to talk about today can be applied to any local legislative campaign. So, the legislative process. Now that we've discussed the basics of retail pet sale bans, we need to learn how to pass one. So these are the three things you want to consider when you're talking about legislation at the local level. Where do you live? Who is your representative? And how does your local legislature pass laws? So you need to figure out what governmental body controls where you live. So for example, I live in Potomac, Maryland, which is an unincorporated area, meaning we don't have a mayor or a government. Instead, I'm governed by the Montgomery County Council. So on election day, when I vote, I'm voting for members to sit on the county council. And this should be very obvious to most of you. I imagine most of you know where you live and what government governs you. I just also wanted to have this slide because, first of all, some people don't know, and which is fine. And second of all, you generally are only going to want to be working in your own community. So you can absolutely join a larger coalition that's working in a neighboring city, or work with a colleague or another advocate on a ban in their city. But if you're the one kind of spearheading the whole movement, unless you're part of an organization, you probably want to stick to your own community, because generally, and I'll emphasize this multiple times throughout this webinar, legislators just want to hear from their own constituents. So next, who is your representative? Most local governments have websites at this point, unless you live in a very small community. So it should be very easy to figure out who your representative is. As you can, this is the Montgomery County map. You would just, I see, oh, well, I live around here, kind of. I guess I live more here. but I'm in the green, so this is my representative. And in some places, especially larger places like Montgomery County, you cannot, they should probably have a tool where you can just go to the website and enter your address and they will just tell you who your representative is. Why is this important? Because your personal representative is usually a good person to start with when you're considering trying to pass an ordinance. And this is because this is the legislator who's kind of most responsible to you. So if you had a problem with your trash, your trash wasn't being picked up and you contacted the Department of Sanitation and you weren't getting anywhere, you might reach out to your legislator for assistance with that issue. Similarly, you might want to consider starting with your own legislator when proposing an ordinance. Of course, if you know that there's someone on the council who's particularly a big, a strong animal protection, a strong animal advocate, or for example, your legislator would be particularly opposed to animal protection, maybe you don't want to start there, but generally I would start with your personal representative. Next, and finally, how does your legislature pass laws? You're going to want to familiarize yourself with the legislative process in your community. Now, if you haven't seen the Schoolhouse Rock song or video, I'm Just a Bill, I suggest that you go to YouTube, not right now, but later today, and watch that video because it's far more interesting than what I'm about to say. And it definitely encapsulates how tedious the process can be. But don't worry, that is about federal legislation, which is very difficult to, it's very difficult to pass laws at the federal level, especially right now, but really always. So you're not going to hit a lot of the roadblocks depicted in this video, but it's still, it's fun. The process for passing local laws depends on your city. Generally, an ordinance is introduced, assigned to a committee or multiple committees. That committee can make amendments to the language. There will be public hearings either at the committee level or by the full council, oftentimes both, and there will be a vote. Now, I've seen this, as I said, I've worked in local governments across the country, and I've seen this process really vary. A place like New York City has a really complex legislative, not complex, it's not difficult to understand, but there's a lot of steps that a bill has to move through in New York City. And I've also been in very, very tiny cities in Missouri where they didn't have committees. You just kind of presented the ordinance. I think they had one hearing. The following week, they voted. But I just listed on the screen some of the common things that might happen in your local legislature. And that's not, again, it's not meant to say all these things will happen, though certainly a bill needs to be introduced and certainly it needs to be voted on. But at least you can begin to familiarize yourself with the larger process. I also considered walking you through multiple cities' processes, but I decided that was way too confusing, and you just don't need to know. You don't need to know what Jacksonville, Florida is doing if you live in Alabama. So I suggest that you first look online. Some cities actually have like flow charts and breakdowns of how their legislature works. And if not, you could also always attend a meeting. Most councils meet at least once a month and kind of get a feel for how things work. So finally, we're at the tofu instead of meat of the webinar, how to pass laws at the local level. I like to think of passing local legislation as a two-step dance. First, you have to sell it to legislators. Then you need to use grassroots advocacy to demonstrate that your community wants and supports this bill. So here are some tactics you can use to sell the idea to legislators. Meetings, fact sheets and FAQs, using non-animal protection arguments, telling your story, and connecting the issue to your community. So meeting with legislators. You're probably going to want to start by scheduling a meeting with your legislator, or in all honesty, probably a staff member. You're probably not going to get a meeting with the actual legislator, though again, this really depends on how big your community is, but rather a staff member. And do not think that's not rude, or don't be put off by that. That's totally normal. My general tip for meetings with legislators is to have a clear and specific ask. So let's say you set up the meeting by calling or emailing, very easy to do. You get there and then you say something really general like, there's too many animals being killed in our shelter, or I want our county to take a stronger stand on animal protection, or I want our county to do a better job of protecting animals. Well, that's not a great use of meetings. Though it's great that you let your legislator know there are people who care about animals, it's not going to be a very productive way to run a meeting, because vague requests aren't productive. Generally, rational people can all agree that things should be better, but what does that mean? The issue is when you start getting into the weeds about how to make something better. But luckily, you're there to propose a very specific, you're there to propose a specific ordinance, like a retail pet sale ban or whatever you're working on. So you have a perfect, convenient, clear, and specific ask. Next, you want to always be polite and kind. Even if the meeting doesn't go well and you're treated derisively or rudely, getting angry will not serve you in the long run, I promise you. Even if this person doesn't help you with your goal, you don't want to develop a reputation as someone who's difficult. And for animal advocates, this is particularly thorny because I think unfairly a lot of animal advocates have been, we're kind of portrayed as maybe irrational or maybe bleeding hearts who are just sort of guided by our love for animals rather than, a steely-eyed vision of understanding of law and policy. So we kind of have to go the extra step and be extra polite and extra kind. And unfortunately, you won't always be treated kindly. I've certainly been in meetings where legislators or staff members were perhaps not mean, but they were dismissive or rude. And you just have to smile, thank them for their time. Always treat people with respect. And to that end, you're also going to want to dress appropriately. You want to dress like you're going to a business meeting. I would say business casual. This dog is a little bit overdressed. I would avoid a tuxedo. But I would also avoid, a sweatshirt with your favorite dog on it. Somewhere in the middle, maybe nice pants and a suit jacket or something like that. You want to look business appropriate. You want to look like someone who should be taken seriously. Next, fact sheets and FAQs. So at these meetings, you want to leave something behind. You have to provide clear, sound arguments in support of your ordinance. Legislators are busy and they're dealing with every issue under the sun. You cannot expect them to be experts in animal protection. You need to make it easy for them to understand why you're right. So a good way to do this is with a fact sheet. It can be as simple as taking 2 or 3 of your strongest arguments, putting on a little banner at a little blurb at top explaining what a retail pet sale ban is, what a puppy mill is, sticking it in a Word document, and you're done. You're going to probably hear different advice on this topic. I like to keep fact sheets really short, definitely not more than 1 page, preferably just the front side, but you could do, if it's big lettering, you could do front and back, because this is really just supposed to be a primer. It's only the bare bones. Now, in addition to fact sheets, you can also do an FAQ, frequently asked questions. these can be much longer. And it should anticipate your opponent's arguments. So for example, you know, when you propose a retail pet sale ban, you might have people saying, well, you know, aren't puppy mills already regulated at the federal level? Can't we, you know, if this person has a license, can't we trust that everything's going to be okay? That was stated very ineloquently, but you get the idea. And to that question, you can say something like, no, virtually all puppies sold in pet stores come from puppy mills. Many pet stores advertise their puppies as coming from small family breeders or USDA certified breeders, but in reality, ... Again, FAQs can be longer than fact sheets. Well, they should definitely be longer than fact sheets if it's a chance to get really into the nitty-gritty of the issue. I also want to note that if you can use statistics and figures, use them. Just be sure to include the full citation. It makes your work look more credible, and then the legislator or his staff member can go back later and read whatever you've cited for further background information. And luckily, we've taken some of the guesswork out of this for you for fact sheets and FAQs, and we put together both these items for retail pet sale bans, and they're brand new and available, I think, in this webinar, but they're also available at aldf.org/retailban. And you'll also find a contact form, so if you're interested in getting some help on your ordinance, you can fill out that form, and if it looks like it's something that we'll be able to help you on, we will reach out to you. I want to note that sometimes, for whatever reason, it might be better for you not to have this branded FAQ or fact sheet, in which case you can just copy and paste this information and again, just stick it in a Word document. It's not stealing. At my old job, people would always email me and be like, can we use the information on your website or is that stealing? And I'd be like, no, not stealing. We want you to use the information. If you see certain portions of what we've put together that are applicable to your community, just copy and paste it, stick it in a Word document. We want you to use the information to help animals. We did not create this so that you could go around showing people our beautiful materials. So if you're so inclined, please do so. Okay, use non-animal protection arguments. In addition to discussing animal protection, you want to incorporate other arguments in your advocacy. So, for example, for retail pet sale bans, those might be consumer protection, because there are many families who have been defrauded by pet stores, and then cost savings for municipal shelters and animal control agencies. So for the cost savings argument, you can say that by increasing the number of animals for sale in your town, you're making it less likely that people will adopt. Your city or county is responsible for impounding, housing, and ultimately killing, unfortunately, animals in need of homes. And the reality of that is that it costs money. And that money is your tax dollars. So you can say you don't want your tax dollars going to killing animals, while at the same time we're permitting unscrupulous pet stores to profit off increasing the number of animals in your community. Tell your story. You need to explain why this issue matters to you, but be brief. Maybe you know a family member who actually bought a dog, or maybe you bought a dog from a pet store because you didn't know, and that dog became seriously ill and you had to pay thousands in veterinary bills. That would be a very relevant story to tell your council member. Or maybe you're active in dog rescue and you know firsthand how many animals are in need of homes. If possible, connect your personal story to your community. So again, if you have a family member who purchased a dog from a pet store in your actual community, that'll be a perfect story to tell. You want to be brief, because I know in my experience, animal protection advocates can sometimes have a tendency to go on tangents or talk at great length about a dog they've rescued. So I want to hear those stories, but it's not, when you have a 15-minute meeting with the legislator, that's not the time to tell them the story. connect the issue to your community. So in that vein, you want to tell how a retail pet sale ban would benefit your community. And so for that, you're going to have to do a little bit of research. Specifically, you're going to probably want to look up shelter statistics, meaning how many animals are entering your local shelter and the outcomes, you know, are they being killed? Are they being adopted? Are they being returned to owner? Are they being fostered? You're also going to want to look up news stories about pet stores in your area to see if already there have been allegations of unscrupulous business practices. You also want to check, this is also a good way to find out if someone before you has already tried to pass a retail pet sale ban and not been successful. That would be very relevant information to know. You also want to research the pet stores on Yelp and Facebook because, you know, people have a tendency to turn to social media or review sites when something goes wrong, not when something goes right. So you're probably going to be able to find stories of people who have had bad experiences. So you just want to, you know, package all that research into a nice packet, and if it's particularly relevant, share that with the legislator as well. The point is that you can't, it's not as effective to merely say we need to stop we need to stop puppy mills. You know, stopping puppy mills is the moral thing to do, so our community should do it. I think that's a very strong argument on its own, but your legislator is probably going to want a bit more nuance to know how his community is being impacted and why he should take action. Next, we have grassroots advocacy. You have to rally your community to support your proposed ordinance. So first, what is grassroots advocacy? Grassroots advocacy, in part, is just getting regular people from all walks of life, getting them active in politics, getting them to contact their legislators at the local, state, federal level, and sometimes contacting regulators on specific policy issues. So it's just getting people engaged in the political process. If you are a member of the Animal Legal Defense Fund email listserv, you've probably received alerts from us asking you to contact your legislators. And when we ask people across the country, they email, they call, they tweet at their legislators, usually in support of a bill, but sometimes in opposition to bad bills. And this kind of action is critical. It can make all the difference between a bill passing or failing. Grassroots advocacy is so important. We live in pretty politically divisive times, and I think a lot of people are apathetic and they think their voice doesn't matter, but this is not true. Their voice, and more importantly, their actions absolutely do matter, and they make a big difference when it comes to whether a bill will pass or fail. But how do you actually get people to get active for animals? There are a lot of different tactics, but we're going to talk about 3 today. Action alerts, social media, and testimony. So action alert. An action alert is just a fancy term of art we use to describe when you ask people to email or call their legislators. And this on your screen is an example of an action alert we recently sent to Massachusetts regarding a beagle bill, which would require research institutions to offer dogs and cats for adoption at the conclusion of the research. If you're on our list, again, as I said, or you're on the list really of any nonprofit organization that's even slightly politically inclined, you've probably received these alerts before. But you don't need to work at an organization to send an action alert. You just need to know how to use email. And this is a close-up of some of the language we recently used. But don't worry about copying it. I just wanted you to get a taste. Again, you can probably look through your old emails and you'll find examples of alerts. So the first rule of action alerts is that there are no rules. No, that's a bad joke. There are actually a lot of rules when it comes to action alerts. I think there are a lot of steps you want to take to make sure your alert is effective. The most important thing is to keep it short and explain the issue, why you're asking people to take action. You can write something like, "Hi, I'm working to pass a retail pet sale ban in Montgomery County. This law will protect countless dogs who are suffering in puppy mills across the country." So basically you need to, then say this law will only pass with their support and you need them to do X, Y, Z. Make it easy. Now this, I shouldn't have said the last thing was the most important because this is the most important. You have to make it easy for people to take action. You need to clearly list the legislators' names and you need to list their contact information. You can't just say, please contact your council member and hope people will take the time to Google who their council member is and how to contact them. You have to lay out every step for them. So this is an example of an alert we posted to Facebook in September, or I know that was 2018. That was last year. That was the Los Angeles fur ban. So you can have you get an idea of the kind of information that you need to relay. Now, people ask me all the time, are canned messages better than personalized messages? And you can see here, we always provide a canned message, a script for people to use when they're calling or emailing their legislator. And we do that because we want to make it easy for people. But yes, personalized messages have more impact. And that's why in a lot of alerts we send, we do ask people to personalize their alert, especially with email. Phone calls matter less. You're not going to have a long conversation, so you really can just call and repeat, this script. But the reality is most people aren't going to take the time to research the issue and craft their own message. So it's really important that you give them that canned message. And again, you need to spell out what you want them to do. Don't even say contact your council member. You need to say email and make a phone call, or just make a phone call. You need to be really, really crystal clear, or people aren't going to do anything. And it's not because they lack compassion, it's because they lack time. We all have a lot of competing priorities in our life. And for most people, your retail pet sale ban is not going to be their #1 priority. So make it easy. So now that you've crafted your action alert, who do you send it to? You want to send it to everyone who lives in the city or county. And it doesn't have to be just people who like animals. It can be people who like you. So people you go to church or temple with, people in your neighborhood, your friends and family. Just be sure to BCC people so you're not giving away like 100 people's email addresses. The only thing that they absolutely need to have in common is, again, that they actually live in the district. Do not, and this is important, do not ask people outside the district to respond to your action alerts. And this is because it can actually undermine your efforts. Legislators don't usually want to hear from people who live outside of their district. They want to hear from voters because legislators want to be reelected, so they're most invested in the opinions of their own constituents. The exception to this would be organizations and prominent community leaders. Of course, it's more than acceptable. It's good to get, local rescue groups, heads of civic organizations to write letters in support of your ordinance. And it doesn't matter if they're headquartered in another city. National groups all the time send letters of support to legislators regarding particular bills. But aside from organizations and community leaders, just ask people in your own district to take action. So social media. This moves us right into the next prong of grassroots advocacy, because of course you're going to want to also share your alert on social media. If you're already part of a group, you already run a page, of your local rescue group, or you have, I don't know, like Montgomery County Takes Action for Animals. I just made that group up. If you have some sort of platform, obviously share the alert to that page. And you're also going to want to be updating the community on your latest efforts. But if you don't have a page, just post it to your personal Facebook page. That's fine too. Again, You're going to want to remind people to only take action if they live in the district. This is especially important on social media because, you know, these posts can be shared over and over again, and someone in like Bulgaria might reach it, and you don't want them emailing your legislators. Again, a note on being kind: do not use social media to attack legislators. You can address policy differences, but don't attack or malign a legislator personality or behavior. You want your page to look professional. You can note that you have a difference of opinion with someone. You can say something like, we're disappointed to share that Councilmember X has declined to support the retail pet sale ban for the following reason. We refute this reason for the following. You're going to want to write it more organically than that, but you get the idea. But you don't want to say Councilmember X hates animals and is a bad person. You want to keep it about the policy. Some obvious tips: don't use all capital letters. If you didn't know, that means you're yelling, both in email and social media. I still receive sometimes emails in all capital letters, and it's very jarring. So no all capital letters, no profanity. Just keep it professional. So testimony. City councils have time allotted in their schedules, generally during their general meetings, usually for people to speak about whatever issue they want. And if an ordinance is being considered, there will almost certainly be a public hearing where members of the community can weigh in with their opinions. The times vary a lot, but generally I found you're going to have about 2 to 3 minutes. So you want to be prepared. That's not a lot of time. It's not the time, again, to talk at length about your own rescue animals or your own journey to animal protection. You want to keep it about the issue. You do want to introduce yourself. You want to say, explain who you are. And so I'd say something like, my name is Liz Holtz. I'm an attorney at the Animal Legal Defense Fund. I've lived in Montgomery County my entire life. Then you're going to want to state your stance. So I would say, I'm here today to testify in support of Ordinance XYZ, a retail pet sale ban. Then you're going to want to use your strongest arguments and just go through them. You're going to also want to encourage other community members and other community leaders to testify. So your own testimony is actually just half the battle. And if you're encouraging other regular community members, like your friends and neighbors, to testify, you're going to want to do a little bit of coordination usually. Oh dear, my dog is barking. Hopefully you can't hear that. You're going to want to do a little bit of coordination, meaning you don't want 5 people to stand up in a row and say the exact same thing. So you might say, okay, person X, I want you to cover the consumer protection angle, and person Y, I want you to cover the animal welfare arguments, and this person, I want you to talk about how puppy mills aren't meaningfully regulated at the federal level. It's okay, legislators are not expecting a super polished performance at this level. You can be natural. It's okay if people repeat the same arguments, especially your stronger arguments. But if you have the ability and the time, you do want to try to make it a little bit structured. And that was my whirlwind guide to passing laws at the local level. As I mentioned, if you go to aldf.org/retailban, you can find a submission form where you can reach out for help with ordinances, or you can reach me directly at eholtz. I go by Liz, but my real name is Elizabeth, so it's eholtz@aldf.org. And I just want to thank you for joining me today. And I think Priscilla is going to see if there are any questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Liz. That was very fantastic. And we do have a few questions, so I will get right to them. Miriam is asking about the no caps. So, okay, you don't want caps, but can you highlight or bold or italicize certain portions of your letter or your alert to kind of grab attention? What about formatting without caps?
For your letters, no. If you're writing to a legislator, I would generally say you're going to want to avoid all caps all the time. For social media, certainly a word could be in all caps. We do that. We'll write like urgent in all capital letters or take action. What you want to avoid is saying things like is full sentences in all capital letters. And again, these aren't hard and fast rules. I just want to let you know from my experience, from my years of doing grassroots advocacy, that I've seen a lot of groups rely on capital letters, and I've spoken to legislators who have then conveyed that they find it unprofessional, or that they've interpreted that as a lack of, that they're a little bit less reasonable. So it's more kind of an FYI to you guys.
Okay, and then so bolding, so if you bolded a sentence like deadline is, October 20th, and you bolded that sentence, it would be okay, but just try to stay away from caps, stay away from anything that would come across unprofessional or unreasonable.
Exactly. And actually, all capital letters like deadline is Tuesday, that would be appropriate. What you want to not use, you don't want to use caps as a way to convey emotion. You can use it to convey, critical information, I'd say.
Perfect. All right, so our next question is from Christy, and she's asking, do retail pet bans address backyard breeders who sell directly to customers and not through stores, or is it just through stores selling puppy mill animals?
So that's a great question. Retail pet sale bans refer generally, well, the word retail, yes, it refers to pet stores. So it's not going to refer to people who are selling animals directly to the public. Certainly, other kinds of laws and groups are working on legislation that addresses that issue of people who are maintaining dogs in poor conditions and selling directly to the public. But it's a great question and a fair question, because a lot of people say, well, this retail pet sale ban won't solve the entire problem, and that's absolutely true. A retail pet sale ban is just one tool in your toolbox to address puppy mills. It is not the end-all be-all. If every state passed a retail pet sale ban today, it would not mean that we could all stop working on this issue, because people unfortunately are also selling dogs online. It's just a good way. It's an effective way. It's a powerful way to start taking a stand and it also, I think, just merely by having a retail pet sale ban, even in a community that doesn't have any pet stores currently selling dogs, it sends a message to people, the adopt, don't shop message. So I personally think retail pet sale bans are a really positive way to take on puppy mills.
Perfect, thank you. And Miriam is asking, so lobbying can take a lot of money. If you're a financially limited activist, how can you push a bill through?
Okay, another great question. So I think you're thinking of lobbying, you're thinking of like men in suits on K Street in DC. So yeah, it's extremely expensive to hire a professional lobbyist. And unfortunately, that's why, a lot of corporations, they have whole teams of professional lobbyists, and their voice is disproportionately heard in our legislatures. But when I say lobby, I'm not talking about professional lobby. I'm talking about you personally, or your friends or your group personally meeting with legislators, personally asking friends to take action. So it shouldn't, I don't want to be naive and say it costs no money, because your time is money, right? I'm sure all of you have, full-time jobs or families to take care of and other responsibilities. So I don't want to say, oh, well, it's totally free and easy, but there's not any associated costs with just being a grassroots lobbyist necessarily. Again, you're not hiring a professional to lobby for you. You are doing the lobbying yourself. And so your most valuable resource is time.
Great. I'm going to jump on a webcam just so I'm not like a floating head talking anymore. So B is asking, do you think it's important to get retail bans in communities where there are no pet stores because it generates less opposition and gets the issue on the map? Or should we only be focusing on communities where there is retail stores selling animals, and that these laws would have a direct impact for that community?
Another amazing question. I'm so impressed with everyone's questions today. Um, So I think you're going to hear some differing opinions on this. I personally think it's still valuable to pass a retail pet sale ban. So for example, my county, Montgomery County, I think had the first retail pet sale ban in Maryland before we had the statewide ban. And we did not have any pet stores at the time, or obviously now, selling puppies. And I think it's important because, again, going back to the beginning of my webinar, it kind of just builds steam for a larger campaign and makes it possible to pass these laws at the statewide level. It also sends a message to neighboring communities. If you live in a larger place, so Montgomery County, I'm sure none of you know because we're just a random county in Maryland. Montgomery County is big, and we probably have more sway than some other counties in Maryland. So I thought it was really significant for us to take this stand. We also had a neighboring city that was actually in the county but incorporated, if you also remember what I discussed at the beginning. So they're in the county, but they're incorporated, meaning they have their own mayor and their own council, and they did have a pet store selling puppies. And while unfortunately, again, it's moot because there's a statewide ban, that city didn't act immediately to pass their own ban. It definitely would make it easier for them because they have this, the county precedent. Take that with a grain of salt. If there are other more pressing issues in your community and people are saying, no, we've got to focus on this because there are animals, directly being harmed right now, then yeah, you might want to focus your energy first on there. I don't want you to go away from this webinar being like, we have to pass a retail pet sale ban. But I am of the belief that they're still very valuable even in communities without any pet stores.
Yeah, I'd agree. And just getting the momentum going, it gets it in the press, it gets people to start thinking about these issues. So when they do go to a pet store in their local community, they're wondering where are these animals being sourced from. So I definitely agree, especially at this stage of these bills starting to gain momentum. So we have a few more questions, and this one is getting a little bit into the legal realm. But
Okay.
Tim is asking, how, if at all, does the Commerce Clause of the U.S. Constitution affect a state or municipal retail pet store ban or fur ban or circus bans, any of those that might have interstate commerce involved? Do you notice any issues with that, or is it pretty isolated because it's at the local level?
I can, even though I'm an attorney, I can say I cannot speak eloquently on that issue. I will use that opportunity, though, from your excellent question to kind of touch on what you're or perhaps what I think you're getting at is the interplay between the interplay between state, local, and federal governments and their powers, and also, why the federal government, people always ask me, why can't the federal government, or why can't Congress just pass one single animal cruelty law? As opposed to animal cruelty laws that are, affect things that are in interstate commerce. So to that, I'll just say, if you're in a community, as I mentioned, if you're in a community in a state in which there are no other bans currently on the books, you might be not necessarily talking about the Commerce Clause, but you might be dealing with the issue of preemption, and that it's something you may have to deal with. I do also want to say, though, if you're just told right off the bat, like, no, we're preempted, we can't pass a retail pet sale ban in this city, that's not necessarily true. In my previous job, I would deal a lot with cities who made these claims that were not based in reality. I know, I believe Stamford in Connecticut right now is trying to become the first city to pass a retail pet sale ban, and either people within the government, or I'm not going to speak with that much knowledge, or just opponents have said, no, Connecticut municipalities don't have that power. And I know attorneys for the organizations working on the issue have said, no, you do have the power. So it's kind of, you shouldn't just take it at face value when someone says a city doesn't have this power.
Thank you. So sorry, he does not like closed doors. So Wesley is hanging out with me. How would you, let me see. So Jamie's asking, how can I tell if a pet store is using a puppy mill as their sourcing? is there a legal requirement that they be honest with you about that? Can you go in and just ask, where do these puppies come from? How would you suggest if someone was going to a pet store and wondering, are these coming from a rescue, puppy mill, whatever it might be?
So there's kind of two answers to this. One, virtually all puppies sold in pet stores come from puppy mills. So there's no real, if you're asking from like a consumer angle, if you're a consumer interested in purchasing an animal, there's no real point, I personally think, in really digging into it and asking for the records, because no matter what they say or what they show you, that dog is coming from a puppy mill, because smaller breeders don't sell to pet stores. They sell directly to consumers because they want to meet them face to face. So from the consumer angle, they're coming from a puppy mill. If you're asking because you want to kind of build your arguments to the legislators and you're trying to research more what pet stores in your area, what specifically the places they're sourcing from, it varies. Some states do have laws requiring that like certain information posted. So sometimes you don't even have to proactively ask what breeders are being used and their license numbers, because breeders selling to who use pet stores to sell their animals have to be licensed by the USDA, but which is not, being licensed by the USDA is not an indication of welfare. This is particularly complicated right now, though, because even if you have that information of where they're getting the information from, you have the information about the breeders, there's not an easy way right now for you to look up the breeder, and that's because of the USDA Animal Welfare Records blackout. You can learn all about that on our website. But 2 years ago, in 2017, the USDA abruptly removed tens of thousands of animal welfare records relating to the regulation of puppy mills, roadside zoos, circuses, and research labs. And we are currently litigating to get that information back online. Before then, this webinar would have been a little different, because I could have told you to look up puppy mills in your state. I would have told you to look up breeders that are selling to pet stores, and you can still, they have limited information on their website now, and also some groups have posted kind of, I don't know what you even call it, like they've posted files from that they scraped before the database was pulled. So it's still worth Googling, it's still worth looking, but it's really difficult now to find out where these animals, how these animals were treated before they arrived at the pet store, which is why we are using the term blackout to describe the situation.
Yeah. So we are out of time, but there are a few more questions if you don't mind sticking around.
Sure.
And of course we are recording, so if you do need to leave, you can watch later to get the rest of the Q&A. But I do want to try to get to as many questions as we can. So there's two that are being asked that I'm going to combine, because it's about coalition building. So you mentioned having like an email list or something like that. How do you begin to build out those coalitions? How do you begin to build out those listservs? And especially in communities that aren't particularly friendly to animal protection.
Yeah, so coalition building is so important, especially if you're in communities where you anticipate there's going to be opposition. With social media, frankly, one of the easiest ways to do it is to look online, go to Facebook and see what groups are in your area. And you can do that as easily by putting in like Animal Advocate Maryland or Animal Advocate New York City, and use other keywords like vegan groups, Vegans of New York City. You're going to want to look up all the dog rescues. That's a really easy way to start building coalitions. You're just going to want to go to their website, find their contact information, and start emailing them. Sometimes these groups receive a lot of emails, so if you don't receive a response, don't be deterred. You're going to want to go to events. You're going to want to do a little networking, which I know I personally don't enjoy. I'm sure many of you don't love that idea, but that's what coalition building is. So I find it a little easier than networking like professionally to get a job, because you can kind of think you're networking for animals. Yes. You're not networking for yourself. And again, kind of like the alerts, you want to make it easy for them. So you don't want groups to think, you don't want to email groups and be like, at least not right off the bat, like, how, like, help me. You want to make it easy for them and be like, I'm doing this.
Mhm.
Can I count on your support? Specifically, if this is introduced, would your group be interested in testifying? Or another thought is actually a little more nuanced. Some groups can be, I don't know if I want to use the word territorial, but there are certainly politics involved. I'll say this, it's unlikely that you're the first person in the world in your community who has thought of trying to pass a law to protect animals. So you might want to be a little deferential and be like, I heard about all the great work your group does. Are you active in legislation? I had this idea. What are your thoughts? I find that's often an effective way to do it. I'm probably a little, in my previous work, I was probably even overly deferential because I was coming in from out of town. I didn't want to look like I thought I was some fancy lawyer who knew things. You kind of want to be like, you want to defer to people who have established reputations and be like, hey, I heard you're really smart, you want to work together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Animals, not egos. It's working together is so important in this community and to actually get things done. I would add just, even if you're in an area that isn't super friendly to animal protection, they're out there. It's just about finding them. So finding those rescue groups, finding people who are active, who are lobbying at humane days, humane lobby days, who are have some sort of name stake in legislation at the local level. So invaluable, and just work together on those goals, even if you disagree on like nuanced practices or anything. The end goal is to help animals, so it's really important to work together, and those coalitions really can make it or break it. So Tim is asking, advocates in my area have sometimes staged protests outside pet stores to oppose commercial pet sales. Do you think this is effective or off-putting?
That's a good question. I think this is another question where you're going to receive a variety of responses. I think they are effective. I would say not perhaps in terms of legislation, though I certainly read like media stories about groups who do this, and I think that does help, that does help with legislative campaigns always getting press. But I think they're really effective in informing the community. So they're more of like a community awareness event. They're letting people know that they shouldn't shop here. And of course, it's all in the execution. People can kind of peacefully, well, they should always be peaceful, or we definitely hear about it in the news, but they should be, if they're respectful, that's really important. I kind of think these things dovetail, at the Animal Legal Defense Fund, protest is not something that we engage in a lot. We stay really laser focused on the legal process, legislation, and litigation. But obviously, our colleagues in other groups, they either focus solely on protests or kind of gatherings, or they use both strategies. And I think there's definitely room for both.
Thank you. And I believe that that's our last question that we'll take on the webinar. I have some for you offline that are very interesting, but specific to certain local communities. But thank you so much, Liz. I always learn a lot from these webinars, and this one especially because you had the communications angle and how we can actually frame these messages so they're heard by the people who with the power to protect animals. So thank you so much. And I do hope that you all enjoyed it as much as I did. Please do take the survey that will pop up at the end of this webinar. It really does help us, as always. And like I said, we have a lot planned for 2020 for the Animal Law Academy, including Liz is going to be doing more track webinars for advocates. So please stay tuned for those, and just join me in thanking Liz once again. So wherever you are, big round of applause. And I hope that you all enjoy the rest of your week.